What's going on, guys? My name is Jake, and today I have a different kind of video for you. In this video, I'm going to talk about mixing on a tight deadline and how the mentality of mixing quickly can change from when you have all the time you want. I've recently found myself in this situation a lot where I have, say, 2 hours to bump out a quick mix and still try and make it sound mixed and put together. I'm going to walk you through my thought process of this particular mix that I spent about 90 minutes on, and then I'll show you a side-by-side comparison at the end of the video. If you like this type of video, drop me a like and subscribe to keep up to date with all my music production related content. Let's get into it. I always start my mixes with the drums. For this particular mix, I soloed out the drums with the bass. I did this because I wanted to make sure the kick and bass had their own sonic presence. The biggest thing you will notice in this video is how large my EQ bands are. Because I do not have 5 minutes to spend on each EQ adjustment, I simply look to find the general area and boost or cut a significant amount to really amplify or reduce that specific frequency. And like always, seeing how it sounds in relation to a complete mix is very important, so I don't have to go back later on and re-EQ because that's just more wasted time. One of the biggest things that really helps to save time is to have a specific workflow and have a list in your mind so that once you fix one problem, you can move right on to the next one without taking any time to think about what to do next. For example, when I mix the kick drum, I make a judgment. If it needs a gate, then I'll EQ it in relation to the bass, add some compression and some saturation if it needs more width. Then I move right on to the snare, see if it needs a gate, EQ it, compress the sustain for more snap, maybe add some saturation, and finally create a snare reverb to add the final touches. I have a very specific workflow memorized, and it really helps me to pull together a mix on a tight deadline. After the drums are mixed, I obviously check them with the entire mix to see the result, and from here I move on to the bass. The bass usually does not need anything too special, just really want to do a good job giving it its own sonic space and making sure that there are no muddy frequencies present. So if anything, spend a little extra time on the EQ if it needs it, because there are usually less workflow steps for the bass. And after I EQ, I usually just add a bit of compression and saturation to polish it up and send it to a parallel compression track with the drums if it's still not as strong as you want it. The parallel compression track will help to make any of the softer parts more audible and consistent. Next, I move on to the lead instruments, whatever they may be. In this case, there are 2 guitars. Now, my workflow for guitars have a few more steps. The first one is a question that I still personally have trouble deciding on, but because we are on a tight deadline, I really couldn't hesitate. I always have trouble deciding if I should rework the guitar tones with some harmonic processing. A lot of the times, a less experienced guitarist will not have their amp settings dialed in to their liking, so it becomes necessary to really work with this process during the mixing stages. This was the case in this mix, so I went ahead and added it. You'll notice the difference in the end result was quite noticeable. So I changed up the amp settings, go through the general EQ, compression, and saturation workflow, and then the next step for me is to add delay. Delay really helps to turn a thin-sounding guitar into a full-sounding guitar, and it really helps give it dimension. In a situation like this, it will really simply just help give the mix an extra spice that your client will most likely be happy with. And this is another spot where you can save a lot of time by not fiddling too much on the adjustments and just using a preset, then tweaking it a bit to fit your scenario better. People tend to give presets a hard time, but they can help save time. So in a situation like this, they can just help to give you a solid starting point while setting your delay parameters. One of the biggest things to remember is that these mixes are not going to be perfect. They're just not. The idea is to give your client something that sounds full and clean. There really is going to be no time for a lot of song character development with only an hour or 2. So you need to choose your settings and not get too hung up on them. Finally, the last element that I always add in is the vocal. The vocal is going to be the most prevalent, and it's really important that you make it stick out and sound good. If there's anything to come away with from this mix is a nice sounding vocal. So once again, my workflow started with corrective and additive EQ and compression. Due to her voice type, saturation was not really helping, so I didn't hesitate and I moved forward and away from any saturation. Once her vocal was a good level and sounding warm and clear, I went to add reverb and delay. I wanted the delay to create a bit of distance and the reverb to give the voice some environment. I think these effects are always good because they can add a bit of a wow factor to your entire mix and make the client more impressed with the general sound. Once everything is put together, I add one last thing to bring it home, and that is a bit of room reverb. Just a little space to bring the elements into one room and create a sense of realism. Creating a mix on a tight deadline is definitely a tough thing to do. It doesn't give you the time to really decide on the best sounding adjustments for the mix, and it doesn't give you much time to be creative and play around with the sound. So it is very important to have a workflow, to know the steps you need to take to bring the whole mix together. I hope by showing you mine, it will give you some ideas on the process and hopefully help you mix more efficiently. So that is what I have for today's video. Once again, drop a like if you enjoyed it, and I'll be back soon with some more advanced processor tutorials. And for now, listen to how this 90-minute mix came out.